Glad to have you with us. I have two great guests with me this week for the Friday Fahles. My friend Saeed is back, of course, a professor of Near East and Asian Studies at Wayne State University, also a professor at Rochester College, and just all-around swell guy. But Darryl Dawsey is here as well. Longtime journalist in this town, worked at the Detroit News for a long time, but also now works at Wayne State University doing community relations, community engagement. And but we thought we'd bring you in here and see if we couldn't maybe rope you into something else. You never know. See if you got a career in comedy. But basically, the Friday Fahles is this. We talk about the news of the week. We try to make jokes about the dumb stuff that we saw, and every single week there's plenty of dumb stuff. And I think we should start this week's dumb stuff by talking about the State of the Union address. The State of the Union address. The first thing out of the president's mouth is a call for unity. The very next day in a tweet, he rips everybody apart that he doesn't like. So, Darryl, I'm going to put you on the spot here. The call to unity. Bullshit or genuine?
Well, first of all, I'm glad to know I can cuss on the show.
It is on the internet. We try not to too much, but bullshit is not really a swear word anymore.
But I call unadulterated bullshit, giant towering piles of bullshit. Even before the State of the Union, he was ripping people. He was ripping Schumer, called him a nasty SOB, and he was attacking Pelosi and all those guys. Donald Trump is not the guy that you look to deliver you any messages of unification. I mean, he's divisive by his very nature. His campaign, his presidency is very much rooted in divisiveness. So, that's like asking the Monopoly man to set up a charity for the poor. I mean, it's probably not going to work out.
Yeah. Saeed, I mean, yeah, of course he's going to call for unity now that the Democrats have taken control of the House. Right? Because if he wants to get anything done, he's going to need to cooperate with them in some regard. But we're off to a pretty bad start with all this discussion of the wall. He doubled down on everything during the speech about the wall and about this national security crisis that we are allegedly experiencing right now. And, I've seen a lot of people like you streaming across that border,
Well,
it's sort of like ICE 13, we call it now. It's a combination of ISIS and MS-13.
I think we should have dressed in white, today, just to show what our position would be relative to the State of the Union address. Look, I think what's important to recognize is that, of course, it was a complete smokescreen to go ahead and talk about unity. It's total hypocrisy. Not the first time that the president has done this, but it was effective. If you take a look at the polls, a lot of people thought that he really hit a home run with the speech, including independents. So we know that the base was going to go ahead and be with him, even if he was reciting the ingredients to Cheerios. But the fact that he was able to score some points with independents, I thought was really interesting. And he was also setting the stage for calling for unity so that any of the House hearings that were going to come up, including some today, were going to be called presidential harassment.
Yes.
So again, it was putting the onus back onto the Democrats for being the ones to disrupt unity.
Well, and the fact is they are going to investigate. It's pretty darn clear. We saw Adam Schiff the other day say, yeah, we're not just going to look at the Russia stuff. We're going to look at his books. We're going to look at his personal finances, which was a no-go zone for the president, right? He always said, oh, no, they can't ever go there. They're going there.
I mean, they almost have to. I mean, Trump's like the murderer who leaves like bloody handprints all over the place. I mean, you got to deal with
the Bruno Mollies.
You got to deal with this guy. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I think he's pretty brazen in terms of his disregard for the law, in terms of his disregard for political norm, and everybody's sort of looking under rocks for the smoking gun. I think the smoking gun is right there in your face. I think the collusion is the fact that he's the president. I think that every time he calls this a witch hunt, Mueller winds up indicting more people. More people wind up going to jail. He's uncovering whole covens of witches if this is a witch hunt. So I think that the Democrats have absolutely an obligation as the oversight body to look into this guy, on a number of fronts.
I think that's the title for his next book, If I Colluded.
They could have that interview, 10 years ago. I'm looking at it, and so many of the things that he talked about in the speech were provably false. Typically, when he's on a campaign rally or something like that, he makes these outrageous statements and those barn burners that he does out in the middle of nowhere. But this is the State of the Union address. And he tosses out these stats about El Paso. And of course, the sheriff of El Paso comes out right away and says, hey, our town's actually pretty nice. It's always been pretty safe. We didn't have a huge crime problem before this wall came up. We don't have a huge crime problem now. the willingness for his speechwriters even to put that in there, or do you think he was going rogue in that one, talking about El Paso?
Well, I think Marty Robbins is actually going to speak from the grave or sing from the grave, so I'm looking forward to that as a sequel song. I think it was a speech that you could see the fingerprints of Stephen Miller. You could see some of the fingerprints of Kellyanne Conway at various points, because those are the talking points that they use. There was an agenda to sort of soften things up, to moralize national security, to say that it is a moral issue, and then to go ahead and actually sit there and talk about that he was doing something for the greater goods after ripping babies away from their parents, right, and having no knowledge now how many that they've done, and saying we can't reunite them. I mean, this has gone beyond Banana Republic. I mean, these are just war crimes now, because after all, he has declared war on immigration.
Well, apparently, and who knows, maybe war with Iran pretty soon. Talked a lot about Iran in that speech, Saeed, and I always have, Saeed is on every time we talk about the Middle East, because he knows more about it than anybody I know.
Which is on every 3 days.
You know, there was just the same old saber rattling we've heard about the Iranian regime for a long time. What do you call him? A crazy regime, I think is what he said.
Yeah.
Even though his intelligence people last week said that Iran was complying with the terms of the nuclear deal, Iran didn't seem to be showing any signs of ramping up their aggression towards their neighbors. Of course, they're responding to Saudi Arabia and Yemen. You know, proxy wars go on in that part of the world all the time. But, you know, if you're sitting in Iran right now, what are you thinking about what President Trump had to say in that speech?
Well, I think they were giving plaudits to John Bolton because he was able to infiltrate the speech. But that speech really wasn't directed at Tehran. That speech was directed at Netanyahu in Israel, and MBS in Saudi Arabia, and MBZ in the UAE, basically saying, hey guys, I've got this one. You can go ahead and tell your public that you've got a friend in Washington. Certainly with Netanyahu and some of his corruption charges that he has to deal with, and an election coming up, Netanyahu can use that as talking point, saying, see, I'm in tight with the U.S. president. That's something that my opponent's not going to be. And if that means going to war with Iran, so be it.
Speaking of MBS, the Washington Post has been dogged in their pursuit of the truth about what happened to Jamal Khashoggi. And there was some new reports that came out that says there's actual direct orders from MBS to actually take this out. If he doesn't come back, we'll get him with a bullet, I think is like an email or some sort of message that they found the other day. Yep. Donald Trump still sticking by this guy, still suggesting that there's no evidence to the contrary. And now, of course, you have Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post, getting threatened by the National Enquirer to out him.
By Pecker.
David Pecker, exactly. Pecker's out. Yeah, the New York Post headline today is pretty good, by the way. I'll show that to you guys a little bit later. So anyway, it really looks like there is maybe a concerted effort on the part of the president to quash, you know, any more reporting on by the Washington Post, threaten the owner of the Washington Post in some way with some salacious details about his affair. I mean, he's already getting divorced. He's already going to be out several $1 billion. I mean, is he really worried if there's a couple of pictures of him floating around out there at this point?
Can you imagine? Can you imagine what a different movie All the President's Men would have been if Nixon was actually threatening or extorting Ben Bradley?
An actual dick pic? Sorry, had to go there.
No, but I think that this idea that it opens up now a bigger can of worms, that Russia, of course, is a problem, but how many foreign countries have leverage over this president for favors or covering things up? Now, I'm not sure if MBS said bullet. He could have been saying bullet point, which of course takes it into a whole different direction.
I don't even think it's necessarily, I mean, leverage, yeah, but you know, with Trump, it's oftentimes just about pure greed, I think. You know,
and that's what the Saudis have to offer, and that's actually the only thing that they have to offer is money. And I think that when he kept saying after Khashoggi's murder that, well, listen, it's terrible that somebody was murdered, but we have millions and hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars of arms deals. I don't think it was just about military. I don't think it was about jobs. I think it was really padding the coffers for a lot of projects that the Saudis were willing to pony up, because for them, it's a normal course of business.
And it's about enhancing and underscoring his own business interests, his personal. With Trump, it's always about, you know, follow the money, follow his pocketbook in particular.
Well, his pocketbook has led him to the National Enquirer a few times. Absolutely. And now we've got this accusation made by Jeff Bezos that they were trying to blackmail him over this story, which just came out this morning, as a matter of fact, which is a pretty big deal. If the National Enquirer indeed was blackmailing Jeff Bezos, about some of the negative Trump coverage, which it seems to imply. That's what Bezos is implying. We don't know. I mean, obviously it's going to be tough, but I think he's already referred it to a couple of investigators. We'll see.
Well, one of the things is that he's got the money, he's got the resources to go ahead and pursue this, and he even said that other people wouldn't, but I feel obliged to do it because I can. The other thing is that this can be prosecuted if there is a prosecution at the state level, which means that Trump is not going to be able to pardon his friends. So that means that all bets are off for Pecker with his immunity. I mean, it's full exposure.
Jeez.
It's going to be left dangling.
Guess we're going that way today, everybody. That's fine. I started it. It's my fault. It's my fault. We're in the midst of the Friday Fahles here on the Craig Fahle Show on Deadline Detroit. Saeed Khan is here. Darryl Dawsey is here. Let's go down south of the Mason-Dixon line, shall we? What the hell is going on?
That's not another metaphor for Pecker.
Oh, gee. Speaking of Peckers, just about every elected official in Virginia. What the hell is going on down there?
And how's
You've got the governor.
It not Florida this time?
Well, you know, when it comes to just pure old racism, Virginia seems to do it better than just about anybody.
Virginia is where it all started in the United States. So,
absolutely it is.
It's only fitting.
But you look at it, the governor, a Democrat, the Attorney General, a Democrat, both admit to wearing blackface. We'll talk a little bit about the excuses in just a second because they're just outlandish. But now, of course, you have another situation where the lieutenant governor's embroiled in a sex scandal, which that could be problematic for him because her accounting of this thing is very, very plausible. And they were both there. There's no way to prove it one way or the other, but her story seems to be pretty plausible. And now you've got a Republican leader in the state Senate there who is the editor of the Virginia Military Institute yearbook. And his yearbook that he edited has all kinds of people in blackface in it, a couple of N-bombs thrown in there and some other stuff for good measure. Granted, it was back in 1968, but still, this seems to be a problem down there. Blackface, especially in 1984. I graduated from high school in 85. This is not something kids were doing.
I graduated in 1985 too. This wasn't something that was cool to do. It wasn't cool to do in 1975. I mean, let's be real about it.
It's never been cool
right,
to do.
This has never been a good thing. I mean, you know, even when Al Jolson was doing it and it was being popularized, black people were very upset. You know, I mean, just well-meaning people all over the country understood that this is a caricaturization. It's rooted largely in hate and rooted largely in disdain for other people and their humanity, their ability to contribute productively. I mean, it's a giant slap in the face. And I mean, certainly it's a direct slap in the face, I think, to African Americans. But I would think that right-thinking people throughout the country in 2019 should understand that blackface is not cool. And what did Northam say to try and downplay? Well, it's not me in the picture.
I'm not in that picture.
I dressed up.
But
like
I did
Michael
dress up
Jackson.
once as Michael Jackson. I'm neither
polish.
person in the picture. Now, there's no way to tell who's under the hood. But he admitted that he was in the picture. Then he came back in his press conference on Saturday and said, I wasn't the guy in the picture, but I did dress up like Michael Jackson once, which somehow just makes it worse for me.
And almost moonwalk.
It makes it worse for everyone.
Moonwalk.
Exactly. I was sort of chuckling about it. Now, here's the thing about that picture that's in his yearbook that freaked me out the most. I was looking at the guy dressed up in the KKK costume. That was no costume. That's something that some dude's uncle had. Like, hey, Uncle Bob's got one of those.
That's
exactly.
Right.
That was a real Klan.
There's still cleaner's
the
tag.
real robes on there.
Like, like the cheapest costume you could get from your own closet.
You don't get that at Party City or Halloween USA. They don't exactly sell those off the rack. This thing was custom made.
It's authentic. Yeah.
At the same time, though, I saw Bin Laden in a bag at Walmart, so it's anything's possible.
Klansman in the crate.
I
But
suppose.
now look, you guys are like youngins. You graduated in '85. I come from an older era. I graduated in '84, and I can tell you it didn't happen in the older era either. And I went to high school in Lapeer, Michigan, which isn't exactly known for being a cultural mosaic. But I think that we have to be honest that I was going to say Venezuela, Virginia, birthplace of the Confederacy, has
Birthplace of slavery in the United States.
Sure. I don't even think we can talk about it past tense. I think we can talk about it in present tense, that it's got a problem with race.
Virginia has a huge problem. I mean, well, let's just be clear. The entire country has a problem with race, and I think that has been underscored, dramatically in the last couple of years into the Trump presidency. I think that what you're seeing in Virginia is this is the byproduct of people from our era when we were in high school failing to embrace, you know, we were having debates then about political correctness. You know, this is just about being sensitive. This is just about being honest. This is about being decent toward people. And you know, this to me reflects just how stunted our thinking has become around what should be obvious, no-brainer kinds of issues, because we've allowed our conversation, we've allowed our discourse, I think, to be infected with this notion, this false equivalence, this notion that, you know, well, you know, if so-and-so is doing it, maybe there's a good reason, or maybe, you know, this stuff has been explained away a long time ago. It's just wrong. And we need to be able to say it's just wrong.
Well, it might be time to clean a little house in Virginia if just about every pocket of that elected legislature is infected with this kind of stuff.
I mean, the sergeant of arms is going to wind up being the governor.
Well, exactly. I mean, who's left? I think it's going to be the Speaker of the House. But if the Democrats, who worked so hard to win Virginia and turn that state blue, get overturned because a couple of their top elected officials are walking around in blackface when they're in their college years, that's just sort of, I guess, a fitting end in a lot of ways. Maybe this is the death of somebody thinking that this stuff is okay.
Well, there's two possibilities and only two that they can do now. They either have to resign or they have to switch parties.
Ooh. Yeah. Now, Donald Trump, of course. This is my favorite part about this. There's some tweets that come out afterwards. He says, look at this horrible situation in Virginia. If it was the Republicans, it would have been dealt with already. Which I spit out my coffee and then I started erupting into hysterical laughter. Because this is the same man who said there are very fine people on both sides after Charlottesville. You know, couldn't condemn the Nazis, couldn't condemn the skinheads, the white supremacists. Couldn't do it. But then he's like, the Republicans would have dealt with this. I'm like, hello, Steve King. Hello, Mr. Muslim ban. You know, the disconnect there is just shocking to me.
What else would you want him to say? That Northam is a fine person?
It would have been more in character.
They're very good people in both sides of this picture.
But what's interesting also is that we have a warped sense of what is Virginia now because of Northern Virginia becoming so blue.
Sure.
We then extrapolate the rest of the country thinking, oh, well, Virginia is now completely on the blue side of the ledger. It's not. I mean, even let's say that Beto O'Rourke were to have won Texas, beat Ted Cruz. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden Texas has become this wonderful liberal blue state. It's become like Austin. Austin is still the outlier.
Yeah.
And I think that can be extrapolated, you know, writ large to the entire country. I mean, we had 8 years of Barack Obama. You know, I remember when Barack Obama first got elected, there was all this conversation about, you know, America becoming post-racial. Are we moving into a post-racial society? Is racism over? You know, 8 years later, you get Agent Orange and all of that kind of thing.
Well, we've got plenty more good examples of bad behavior coming up here on the Friday Fahles here. Elizabeth Warren. Gotta be, you know, equal opportunity when you're going after people for doing dumb stuff. Elizabeth Warren now basically got caught filling out a bunch of forms saying that she was Native American back when she was out of college.
It was her bar card.
Yeah, bar cards. Exactly. She says, and there might be a few more things like that out there as well. You know, I was really dogging the president for calling her Pocahontas. You know, at this point, though, it is getting a little bit ridiculous. And you know, the DNA test that she did, she's had to apologize for that because it didn't prove anything. All she's got to fall back on now is that her grandmother once told her that she might be related to some Native Americans, and that's why she did this kind of stuff. I think this is going to hurt her. I don't know if she bounces back from this. It's a trust issue now.
Well, it is if she tells people that her grandmother was smoking peyote at the
time. You know, it's unfortunate. It's a sort of thing
tribe.
I don't want it to hurt her. I don't think that it should. I think that there are, you know, I think that the good about Elizabeth Warren and her agenda, I think, far outweigh the bad. I think she's a really good kid. It's sort of like when Howard Dean went down because of the Scream. Yeah, I mean, really. I mean, do we really want to throw away potentially good candidates?
You know, Howard Dean and the Scream, like Michael Dukakis and the Helmet. I mean,
the Helmet was pretty bad.
That was pretty bad. But in the case of Elizabeth Warren, I don't know if you saw the bar card. It said American, and then she added the word Indian over it. So I'm thinking maybe she thought that meant favorite cuisines, and that's really Indian.
Yeah,
Indians.
I don't know. There's going to be more of this stuff coming out. She's got to know it. She said there might be more, setting people up for the fact that there's probably a whole bunch of forms she filled out that way at that time in her life.
Well, hopefully she hasn't gone to AfricanAncestry.com. We don't, leave us out of it.
So, about 10 years ago, the biggest fear I think that politicians had was that somebody was going to Photoshop an image. Now we find that there's no need to Photoshop. It's out in the open. Yeah. All of the blackface pictures, all of the bar cards. It's almost like they can't help themselves.
Here's another politician that is embroiled in a racial issue that she probably wasn't expecting. Tulsi Gabbard, of course, who is running for president out of Hawaii, got an endorsement from everybody's favorite racist, David Duke, who thinks she's got some great ideas on racial issues. She, of course, rejected this right off the bat and said, I fully reject this. But she's not off to a good start in this campaign.
She's already one step ahead of Trump. She knows who he is. She's not acting like she's never heard of the guy. She knows who he is, and she immediately stepped forward and said, I don't want to have anything to do. David Duke can come out and, he can endorse anybody he wants to,
absolutely.
And he will. I mean, I can see him almost endorsing people he doesn't want you to vote for just because his endorsement is so radioactive.
Yeah, but the problem with Tulsi is a couple more layers deep. She's spoken out and saying we shouldn't have a problem with Bashar al-Assad. Well, okay, maybe Americans shouldn't, but I have a feeling that Syrians do.
Yes.
He's not a friend to his own people. She is also endorsed by Putin, and she certainly loves her extremist Hindu nationalists, including Prime Minister Modi and the whole BJP. So she's got a reputation of behind the face and behind the aloha kind of placidity of taking some views that aren't exactly in keeping with being a tolerant person.
I can understand that, but I am. I think fundamentally I'm anti-war, and I this is not in any way to argue against some of the points you made in terms of potentially bigoted ideas or thinking, but I think that just the idea that you have candidates who are willing to step forward and say, we've been fighting for so long. I mean, one of the handful of things I think Donald Trump did sort of kind of right was that he announced that we were going to bring these troops home. I mean, I think at some point the United States cannot continually we can't wage never-ending warfare all over the world. At some point this does have to stop.
In the case of Trump, he's looking to go to war with Iran, and he wouldn't mind military intervention in Venezuela. And even Tulsi was against the war in Syria, but she never took war as a concept off the book. She's a bit problematic.
Yeah, I get you.
Yeah.
Well, the all-racist Friday Fahles continues. Liam Neeson, apparently in a little bit of hot water this week for some comments that he made where a friend of his or somebody that he's related to was raped. And he made some comments about how he really wanted to go get the black bastard. The first question he asked her, who was it? Was he black? Whatever. And then he said he was filled with rage for a long time and was actually actively going out to find anybody that could provoke him so he could find a way to get his revenge on somebody because he was so angry about this assault. He walked it back, but he's facing a little backlash for this one. Darryl, you're just rolling your eyes on this one.
I mean, well, it's racist. Obviously, it's racist as all get out. I mean, if your friend had said she'd been raped by a white guy, would you have been going out, with a kosh looking for the first white bastard that you saw to start fighting? Of course not.
He tried to walk it back by saying, if they were Irish or if they were Scottish.
Yeah. So what are you going to do? You're going to go around, waiting to hear people's brogue, and then you're going to attack. It's just, It was racist. Liam Neeson hasn't made anything really good since Taken One anyway. So nobody really cares that much. But I think the funny part to me was where he talked about how he power walked for hours and hours to kind of get this racism out of the system. I'm like,
that's all it takes.
Good for getting racism out of your heart.
You'd think that after all those KKK marches, those guys had marched all the racism right out of their body.
They're the nicest dudes in the world.
It is all about getting your steps in on Fitbit. But, see, I actually thought because he was so into this method acting and blurring the line between fact and fiction, I thought he was going to say, I was going after any black girl I could find because she dissed my stepson in Love Actually.
I just saw that the other day. Why I watched it, I don't know.
Because it's kitschy and it's good. That's about it. Yeah.
All right, this story I thought was interesting. Alabama.
The
substituting
band?
for Florida today.
Oh, okay.
No, not the band, no. Alabama told, they have somebody on death row who's a Muslim, and they said, you can have a priest or a minister, but you can't have your imam here when we execute you. It's either our guy or nobody. Because I don't know why they did that, because it's Alabama. But the appeals court, the U.S. appeals court said, no, you can't you cannot do this. You actually have to allow him to have the religious person of his choice in there when this person's executed. But they are actually trying to stand on that, say, nope, this is our guy, and you got to take Christ's message or nobody else's.
And you know they killed him anyway.
They executed him anyway.
Yeah, I know. They're awful people.
Yeah.
But
see, what I would have done is,
I mean, for people to talk about religious freedom all the time, and we're going to hear this all when it comes to all, we're going to hear stupid religious freedom arguments all the time about wedding cakes and stuff like that. But this is a true case of religious freedom, and they couldn't live up to it. They argued religious freedom when they were trying to put the 10 Commandments on the Capitol there.
Yeah.
I mean, the hypocrisy sort of reeking here.
This is Roy Moreland. I mean, it's not as though every time the warden came to his cell, he says, okay, I'm switching to religion, I'll bring in the next, the next kind of preacher, and kept kicking the can. It seems as though this was a request that had been made. It was a sincere request. Everybody knew that he was Muslim. And I suspect that they were probably trying to request an imam for quite some time. The fact that they didn't is really seen as egregious of a violation of religious liberty as anything that Trump was crowing about at the National Prayer Breakfast the other day.
There is, surprisingly, there is a substantial Muslim community in many communities around Alabama. I know because I have family in that area. I know people who are Muslim in Alabama. Same as in rural Georgia. I have a hard time believing that they could not get an imam, speed dial an imam and get somebody out.
Oh, more than that. I mean, I would suspect that within the prison system there are chaplains. So it's not as though they have to go, I mean, I'm going to use an outdated term, the yellow pages to go find one. There would probably be somebody within the prison system already.
I mean, it's
there should be.
Yeah.
There should be. There wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, well,
and then they killed
Alabama.
him anyway, claiming that he'd waited too late to make this request. I mean, where was the guy going to go? It wasn't what's the big rush?
What's the big rush?
You can't give him a couple of days to get an imam in?
Well, let's wrap up. We got to wrap this up. We got a couple of minutes left here, and I want to talk about this story because I thought it was funny. It took place in India. An Indian man sued his parents for giving birth to him, saying that you're putting expectations on me by bringing me into this world. I didn't ask for this, and therefore I'm going to sue. And it's kind of funny. What was the phrase? I'm going to look it up. But first of all, just the concept of suing your parents for bringing you into the world.
Antinatalism.
Yes, antinatalism. Thank you very much. I saw this suggesting that, we should have some say about being born. I'm not sure how that would work.
Well, I mean, the irony is, of course, there's the belief in reincarnation in India as well. So I wonder, maybe he thought that, I would have preferred a different womb, or no womb at all.
But I don't think your parents make that call.
Or a womb with a view. But yeah, it's a novel idea. I'd be really intrigued to see where it goes. And if I were a law school professor, I think it would make one hell of a final exam question.
I love what he said. Here's his thing. I thought giving birth to another being without its consent and forcing it to work and pay bills for your pleasure is the definition of entitled. Wow.
That's why I had kids.
That's right. I needed somebody to shovel the snow.
That's
right. Exactly.
Well, I mean, I think it poses some really interesting questions about the contract between kids and parents. What then would constitute a breach of contract? I think more than saying that suing them for that he wished he'd never been born, is maybe just sort of sue them for breach of contract, saying, they never got me the most updated toy or things like that. Because after all, I remember being much younger and hearing on television the first time a kid sued his parents for divorce, for emancipation. I'm like, what is this? Nobody told me you could do this.
And I mean, if you really hate the fact that you were born, I mean, you don't have to sue your parents to do something.
He says his life's actually okay. He just didn't get to choose it.
So then I guess the question is, well, can you claim specific damages? There may, in fact, even be a breach or there's a violation, but unless you can prove actual damages, what would your life be worth if you hadn't had a life? That would be the calculation.
Yeah,
that's the philosophical question of the day.
Well, gentlemen, and if he says his life isn't worth anything, well then, I'll take that as a verdict.
Maybe we should send him to Alabama. They could probably take care of the problem down there.
Just don't ask for them up.
All right, hey, have to wrap up there today, and not a funny note at all, but we lost John Dingle yesterday, of course, and I just posted an interview a couple days ago that I did with him back in 2013, And it was amazing how many of the things we talked about are the exact same things we're arguing about today politically. But in it, the reason I posted it is because he was funny. His intellect was just off the charts, for his entire life. The king of Twitter, polite, and been involved in every important legislative decision in the last 60 years. If you think about that, going back, first of all, he was on the floor at the House the day FDR gave the speech on December 8th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the day after when they made the declaration of war. He was on the floor for that. And then on the floor for every important bill that ever passed there. All the important bills that got passed. Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, the Environmental Protection Creation, everything else that he worked on over all those years.
And he was also instrumental in helping to give birth to a classic class of black politicians. John Conyers and a lot of folks, worked with him. So,
he was a gentleman through and through. He also understood politics better than anybody I know. I mean, today we live in a world where you demonize all corporations willy-nilly, or you go ahead and you demonize the working man. And here was a person who was actually providing benefit for both because he understood the inextricable relationship between companies in Michigan, so you don't demonize them, and you understood the link with the working people. I mean, this is why when Governor Whitmer came together regarding the natural gas issue in Macomb County, she ran a campaign where she never demonized any of the corporations. The corporations stepped up, they cut back their natural gas consumption, and we got through what could have been a pretty scary crisis with the drop in temperatures and all. And he's inspired a legion of people. I think it would be really wonderful for people on both sides of the extremes to take a page from the dean.
Well, and for those of you who only knew him through Twitter, just know this. I interviewed him I don't know how many times over the course of my career. I talked to John Dingle a lot. Every single time I interviewed him, I received a handwritten thank you note from the man a couple of days later on that really cool house stationery. And I have a bunch of them still, but nobody does that anymore. It's just a gesture of goodness and frankly, courtesy that we don't afford each other anymore. And if we can learn one thing from him, you can be tough, but you don't have to be an ass all the time.
I mean, and he never forgot that all politics is local. I mean, he would do things. There were things that he would do that obviously would never get written about. I mean, I even got my own story. I mean, I had a passport that was being delayed because of different issues. I called his office, and his office actually helped expedite, me getting my passport. I mean, just a small thing, but these are the sorts of things that, normal, regular folks on the ground, we're looking to these guys to do. It's not always these, big, highfalutin issues that we want to talk about in the headlines and, on social media. Sometimes it's just, hey, I need you to help me get something done in my personal life. These folks come through.
I think, living in Michigan all the years that I have, you look back and how incredibly fortunate we are to have people like Dingle, people like Conyers, people like Carl Levin, people like Sandy Levin. I mean, there's places around this country where you couldn't name your congressperson because they've done nothing or they're sleazy. I mean, to have
sometimes there's an argument for being a career politician. If you're good at it, you should keep doing it. It's one of those things. Nobody faults a guy who works at the auto company for 30 years. If you're good at it, then keep doing it. Anyway, John Dingle, obviously our thoughts go out to the family, and we know what they're probably dealing with. But I'll tell you what, I'm going to miss the man on Twitter. That is for sure. He has been keeping me entertained since he left Congress. All right, Darryl Dawsey, really appreciate you coming in today. Thank you very much. And, of course, Saeed Khan, welcome back. It's nice to have you here. This has been the Craig Fahle Show on Deadline Detroit. The Friday Fahles wrapping up for another week. We'll be back next week to do this again, of course. And don't forget, my regular podcast available every day at Deadline Detroit or anywhere that you get podcasts. It's typically about a half an hour, easy to digest, great for your commute. And, some interviews, good discussions, all that kind of stuff taking place on there every day. So check it out. Thanks for watching today, and we'll see you on Monday. Have a good weekend. And now I think we are clear.
All right. Well, thanks.